Hello everybody and welcome along to this video, which is Mr. Johnson teaches the themes in Macbeth. So it's part of the series of videos that you'll find on this playlist, which are talking you through all aspects of the exam and overall trying to get you ready for it. Macbeth is part of your English Literature GCSE. You find it on paper 1, section A, and it's normally the first paper that you sit as part of your English overall, and one of the first exams that are normally put out there as well. As it says at the bottom of the screen there, you're going to need to be ready to pause this video and make notes for your own revision, of course. Watching this video is a first useful step, but you always need to have something to look back on afterwards as well. So the themes then are very important. They are, as it says here, likely to be the basis of any question that you have as well. They like to write questions the exam board which link to a character and then tie that character into a particular theme. So I'm going to run through some of the key themes here. It's never going to be possible for any teacher to second guess all of the themes and guarantee you which one's going to come up. So I'm going to try and give you a few main ideas. It'll be up to you to be ready to adapt some of what you know, some of what you hear here, and also, as it says on that second bullet point, some of the quotes, and try and make them fit whatever question you get given. That's a skill. Now the next thing is the themes will have crossover with each other as well, so don't just think ambition is completely different to power, for example. There's definite crossover between those, so just have that in your head that there will be some blurring between different themes here, which is actually a good thing because it means you can talk about more than one thing when answering a question. And as I've put at the very bottom there, do try and link this to your AO3 knowledge and the theme and what it's teaching us or showing us, as it says at the bottom there, because it's all well and good talking about power, but the whole point of this play, or one of the points of this play certainly, that Shakespeare is showing us is that power corrupts us, power or too much power is dangerous, the thirst of power is dangerous, and those are the sorts of themes. I don't have a video at this current time of recording, but it's very likely if you look through the playlist you'll find a What Shakespeare Was Teaching Us video, which I'm going to put together. So let's move on then. Starting off then with ambition. Now I think this is probably one of the most prominent themes in the entire play. As it says at the top there, it's wanting more than you have, quite literally. That's what we mean by ambition. Ambition is often a good thing, but too much ambition can lead us on to committing terrible deeds, as we see with the Macbeths. And I put there, it's definitely linked with Macbeth and Lady Macbeth as the two main characters. Further down there you could see, and a point I'd make about ambition here is that breaking the great chain of being leads to consequences. The ambition that Macbeth and Lady Macbeth have to move up that chain, to become king and take what is not rightfully theirs, to usurp, which is a fantastic word to use, leads to those consequences of their paranoia, the sleeplessness, the insomnia, and ultimately the madness that comes at the end. Two quotes for you. Macbeth talks early in the play about his vaulting ambition. Vaulting means like leaping over, and that's almost a really good quote to use for the bit we've just talked about, the great chain of being, almost leaping up over things which are in his way. And he talks at the bottom there, talks about, it was the king's son Malcolm, when he becomes the heir to the throne. Macbeth says, that is a step on which I must fall down or else owe a leap, talking about the king's son. He is now in Macbeth's way. So he's really ambitious there because he's already looking at Malcolm as somebody who needs to overstep somehow and coming up with a plan. So ambition, really, really important theme. There will be other quotes as well, but I'd definitely say those are two really good ones. Next up then is another theme which runs right through the play, and that's the theme of guilt. And I've also put blood there. You could argue that blood is a motif, if you're familiar with that term, but certainly whenever we see blood, it's generally symbolic of the guilt that the characters are feeling. And as it says there, I put a quick definition on that first bullet point. Once again, you'll get a theme here, definitely linked to Macbeth and Lady Macbeth as well, because of the murders that they commit, but also the murders they orchestrate, which is a nice way of saying the murders that they arrange or organise. They orchestrate these murders. The guilt that they feel is part of the punishment that they have for their actions. It's Shakespeare showing the audience that actually, yes, you may be able to get away with a crime, but actually inside of yourself, you'll never feel that you've got away with it. That guilt eats them up, you could almost say as well. For example, when Macbeth says in the middle of the play, "Oh, full of scorpions is my mind," he's talking to Lady Macbeth at that point. And the other final quote there is one you may recognise. That's Lady Macbeth at the end of the play. The guilt is overwhelming her. So actually, at the beginning of the play, she very much feels guiltless. When she talks about having a heart so white and a little water cleanses of this deed, like washes the blood away. By the end of it, that guilt and that paranoia has eaten up her mind. So definitely be aware of the theme of guilt and how most of the two characters don't really feel it so much at the beginning. Well, Macbeth does, in fact, and he moves away from it. Lady Macbeth doesn't and then actually feels more guilty. Then we've got this theme, the theme of violence. Now, this one, again, you could talk about the theme of murder linking in here as well. Those are things which run through the play, but certainly the multiple characters, it says, the multiple murders, that are committed by Macbeth and also influenced by his wife. So in brackets, though, I think King Duncan is murdered, King Duncan's guards are murdered as well. And then, of course, we get the murder of Banquo in there as well. Lady Macduff and her entire family are murdered. So I struggle to say the murders get worse, because the killing of a king is by far the worst crime that could be committed, that regicide. However, the people who die, either like Banquo are a best friend, or Lady Macduff and family are innocent. So in some ways, you could see how those murders are darker in those ways. Maybe that's the way of phrasing it, rather than worse, certainly darker. I put the second bullet point there. Their violence leads to their guilt and also to worsening decisions and worsening actions as well. So it's not only that the theme of violence is there, but the violence which causes the worst things to happen. And again, we see how actually desperation creeps in. That's almost what we're being taught here, that violence leads to more violence. There is, Macbeth talks earlier on, in fact, as well. At one point he says, teaching bloody instructions, return to plague the inventor is something. He recognises that doing bad things and actually being violent will actually lead to violence at some point coming back to him, which of course by the end of the play it does. And that quote at the bottom there is one he almost uses to convince himself. It's one of my favourite quotes in the play. He says, "I am in blood stepped so far that should I wade no more, returning were as tedious as going o'er." In other words, I've gone so far that actually it's almost easier to keep going. I've stepped in this blood so far that actually going back, I can't. It's actually harder to go back from this stage. A really important quote. This theme next is another really important one. They're all important, of course, but I think this is certainly a recurring theme. The disturbed nature. Look at the picture there, like the weather reflects that as well. Almost pathetic fallacy, you could say, but I'd focus on calling it the disturbed nature. As I put at the top there, the unnatural actions of the murders breaks the great chain of being and leads to the consequences that are shown in the weather. So just before Macbeth kills the king, Banquo makes a comment that the night is, that the stars are all out, that you can't see any of the stars that night and something's not right. And then after the murder of the king, there's a scene in Act 2, Scene 4, where characters are talking about it's meant to be daytime and yet darkness strangles the travelling lamp, by which they mean the sun is almost obscured by this darkness. So you can almost, the audience are being told that the bad things that the Macbeths have done are causing consequences in nature, and nature basically means heaven, because nature is controlled by God, and it's showing God's displeasure and God's unhappiness. The Macbeths are trying to move up the great chain of being, something they shouldn't do, and they are suffering the consequences because of it. Now, if you're not sure about what all of that means, then by all means check out that other video as well, which is the Great Chain of Being one. You'll find that on my channel. But again, I've just put a couple of scenes there in the second bullet point. It's referred to in 2.1, 2.4 and 5.1, by which I mean Act 5, Scene 1. So you could look at those scenes again. And that quote there is from the Doctor. When he's looking at Lady Macbeth and her sleepwalking, he says, "Unnatural deeds do breed unnatural troubles," which I think is one of the clearest links to Shakespeare telling us and giving us a very clear message about what happens in this play. Now let's look quickly at the supernatural as well, very much a theme of the play, represented by the witches, certainly as the characters, but also Macbeth when he consorts with them, which is a great word like meets, consorts and works with them and visits them as well. And let's not forget they represent evil. Banquo calls them at the beginning the instruments of darkness. Darkness almost being like hell and the devil, and they are being used like instruments, the witches are, by the devil. It's a link, as I've said there, to hell and the devil. They spur on Macbeth's ambition. They almost encourage, they don't directly encourage him, but they give him information which makes him want to do things and makes him ambitious. And so therefore it leads to his hubris and ultimately to his downfall, which you may have heard called his hamartia. And I've just put a lovely quote there as well. Just if you want a quote for supernatural, just the fact that you've got fire burning and cauldron bubbling, all this sort of darkness as well, and all that alliterative double, toil and trouble going on there as well. Lots of great stuff. There's a video on the supernatural on this channel, so feel free to check that one out for more details. And then this one as well, kingship. What does it mean to be king, in fact, as well as what that means by the idea of kingship? King Duncan is shown, as it says there, to be fair, noble, loved by his subjects, whereas Macbeth, he usurps the kingship, takes it unlawfully, unrightfully, and then is almost constantly described as a tyrant from Act 4 onwards, the way he leads the country, and is also like described as Scotland becomes sick under Macbeth's rule. That personification of Scotland is a recurring image throughout the characters' speeches across Act 4 and Act 5. And I've put that quote at the bottom, which I absolutely love, just showing that wearing a crown doesn't make you a king. Kingship is much more than that, and he does feel his title hang loose about him like a giant's robe upon a dwarfish thief. That's a character talking about Macbeth there, and Macbeth being king. So the final theme I want to talk to you about is this one, which again is a recurring theme. Not many students seem to talk about this independently. Duplicity comes up, this idea of looking like one thing and being another, and we see that recur as well. So I've put at the top bullet point there, deception, like trying to trick people, dishonesty, which is the same idea, and also being two-faced. We can see this from Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, and they do it to multiple characters. It's sinful, actually, hiding your intentions and being like that, so definitely bear that in mind as well. It's cowardly, but also it's taking what's not rightfully theirs. They are tricking people in order to take things which aren't theirs. And that quote from Lady Macbeth there, look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it, which is why I've got that picture on the right-hand side there, is a fantastic quote, linking to the Bible and the Adam and Eve story where they are tempted by the devil in the Garden of Eden. If you've not looked at that, if you look it up, you'll find that's really useful. And also, she says at one point, false face must hide what the false heart doth know. There's also another quote from the king's sons after their father's been murdered, and they say, there's daggers in men's smiles. So people may be smiling at us, but there's hidden dark intentions as well. Lots of different things that you can look at. So that's a very, very quick recap of the themes. I hope you found it useful. If you do like these videos, then feel free to subscribe. Do check out the other ones. And above all, the important thing to do now is continue your revision. Have a go at some practice questions. But I'm going to say a big thank you for watching. I hope you have all the success you deserve when it comes to your exams in the future. And goodbye.